Hey guys, welcome to lesson 4, which is the last lesson of unit 1, and we are going to get into even more new trig stuff today. So let's get going. The first thing we're going to talk about is a reciprocal identity. So if we had the sine of theta is like 5/7, we've talked about how cosecant would be 7/5. So they're reciprocals of each other. But a different way to look at that is that sine of theta is 1 over cosecant of theta. So this is really going to come into play later on in this course. So make sure you're comfortable with that notation before we move on. So at its basic level, again, we've talked about this before, it might ask you to find cosine when you're given secant. So this is easy peasy. All you have to do is flip it because it's reciprocal. Go ahead and try example 2. So this one has a lot of algebra going on in it. So the trig part of it is simply doing that. So if you have that, you understand the trig portion of it. I just wanted to kind of throw in this algebra part just as a review. So you have a square root in the denominator, so we need to rationalize that. So that's what this step is. And then I had negative 2/12, which I simplified to negative 1/6 here. And then I had this square root that I needed to simplify. And then long story short, we end up right there. So the next concept we're going to talk about is all students take calc. And what this is it tells us the signs of the trig functions. So in quadrant 1, all trig functions are positive. So that one's easy. If it's quadrant 1, everything's positive. In quadrant 2, only sine and its reciprocal cosecant are going to be positive. Everything else is going to be negative. In quadrant 3, that T, that stands for tangent. So tangent and cotangent are going to be positive. Everything else is going to be negative. And then finally in quadrant 4, the C in calc, that stands for cosine and its reciprocal secant. Those are going to be positive and everything else is going to be negative. So I've created this little picture here to explain what's going on. So if I have a point in quadrant 2, so the terminal side of the angle is landing in quadrant 2, it creates this angle here. And if I were to find the 6 trig functions, let's just start with sine, for example. So sine, I have opposite over hypotenuse, which is going to give me a positive. So that's why that's positive. Let's do negative 1. So cosine would be adjacent over hypotenuse, which is negative over positive, which is going to give me a negative. So everything else, tangent is also going to use that adjacent side as well. So that's where those sine functions come in. This is really nice to remember. All students take calc to just kind of help you make a mistake or help prevent you from making a mistake on your sines. So what I want you to do is go through problem number 1 and problem number 2, and it's really gathering on everything that we've talked about so far. Okay, so A and B in problem number 1, they deal with the reciprocal function, so that shouldn't be too bad. We're going to go down to problem number 2, and I'll start you out with A, and then you can do B and C. A tells you that tangent is greater than 0. So this means that tangent is positive and sine is negative. So let's go up here to my chart. Where is tangent positive and sine negative? So it's going to be in that quadrant 3. Okay, so try B and C. So you'll notice in C that both sine and cosine were positive, and that only happens when you have your 2 major trig functions positive. That can only happen in quadrant 1. Okay, so we are going to kind of put some of this into practice and tie up some things that we've talked about in the past. So these are kind of like puzzles. So you have an angle in quadrant 2, and it has a sine of 2/3. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a picture of what's going on. So it's in quadrant 2, sine is opposite over hypotenuse, And so I think I'm probably going to have to figure out that adjacent side because it says find the other values of the 5 trig functions. So let's do Pythagorean Theorem and figure out what we get. So when you do the math, you take the square root of something, you have both the positive and negative root of that. So you need to figure out if you want it positive or negative. So in this location, it's going to be negative square root of 5. So from there, we can figure out the other trig functions. Okay, so these are the 6 trig functions that I found. Obviously, you already had that one. What's nice is if you have the sine, you also can find the cosecant without doing any extra work. So you're really just finding these 4 here. Also, what I want to point out about these 4 is it's in quadrant 2, so I know that sine and cosecant should be positive and everything else should be negative. So I'm double checking that. All students take calc concept, and it looks like we've got that correct. Okay, now I want to draw your attention to example 4. This doesn't tell you specifically which quadrant it's in, so you kind of have to like figure it out. So sine is positive and cosine is negative. So let's go up here. Where is sine positive and cosine negative? So again, it's in that quadrant 2. So I know that when I'm drawing my triangle, that it's going to be in this quadrant. So go ahead and try example 4, and then we'll be back and talk about example 5. Okay, this problem was just asking to find the sine instead of the 5 other trig functions. And so I just did opposite over hypotenuse. And so I got square root of 13 over 4. And notice how these are both positive, so my answer is positive. Okay, in example 5, it tells us that theta is in between 0 degrees and 180 degrees. But what if we multiply that theta by 2? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply everything through by 2 so that it looks like this. And I'm going to think about the sine of cosine. So when your angle is between 180 and 270, cosine is going to be negative there because that's in quadrant 3. And when your angle is between 270 and 360, your angle is going to be positive, or your cosine is going to be positive because it's in quadrant 4. So that just kind of gets you to think about some things. So go ahead and try these 2 problems, and then you'll be done. Okay, so these are my answers. I try to show my work on 1 and 2. And as always, if you have any questions, if any of this doesn't make sense, just reach out to me and let me know. But other than that, we have completed the first unit. Yay!